A lot of you know part of my story, my health challenges, bad relationships, things that could have knocked somebody down completely hardcore. I was never the smartest kid on the block. I worked my tail off to fight through school, and then I met Chris. My health challenges happened. I was diagnosed with some health challenges, and then I met Chris. I met Chris because of those health challenges. My friend sent me a friend suggestion for him. It was actually his cousin's wife, and I deleted it. I was like, I am not interested. I don't want to meet a guy. Bye-bye. So I deleted her friend suggestion for him. In the part where I gave up on everything, I quit my job. It was kind of temporarily, but kind of quit my job of 9 years. I just said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. You don't understand me. You don't understand what's going on in my life. And I quit. And I got a friend request from Chris. I was in a really, really, really bad place. And I got a friend request from Chris on Facebook. And I was like, oh, what the heck? I'm never going to meet him. Except, well, one thing led to another. And 8 years later, we have 2 kids. We live in Colorado. And he's the best thing that has ever happened to me.
I love you.
And stand by you.
And stand by you.
As long as we both shall live.
As long as we both shall live.
And because of my health challenges, because I got so sick, I let him in. And he only knew me at that time. He knew me at my worst. And he accepted me. And, you know, through your vows, like through sickness and everything, he's been there. He was the one that let me lay on him and fall asleep for 3.5 hours on his lap while he had to pee. He is the best thing that has ever happened to me.
It begins with 7 words. I don't love you anymore. Those were the last words Shanann Watts ever heard from her husband before his hands closed around her neck. To the outside world, Chris Watts had been the quiet, loyal family man. He was the father who played with his daughters in the yard, the husband who stood behind his wife as she built a dream life online. But to Chris, those words were not a confession, they were a revelation years in the making. The question that has haunted every investigator, every family member, and every viewer of this case is simple: did Chris Watts ever love his wife at all? To answer that, we have to go back. Back before the murders. Before the affair. Before the lies and the silence. We have to strip away the public image, the staged family photos, the glowing Facebook posts, and dissect the marriage from its first heartbeat to its final collapse. Because the truth is this: love leaves evidence. And in the Watts marriage, the evidence doesn't point to devotion. It points to detachment. When Chris and Shanann first met, she was a woman fighting her own body. Lupus, migraines, fatigue, her illnesses threatened to define her life. Yet Shanann was determined to control her fate. She pushed forward, ambitious, driven, a woman who believed in taking charge of her story. Chris, by contrast, was the opposite. Quiet. Passive. Almost invisible. Friends would later say he barely spoke in social settings, often fading into the background. On paper, they balanced one another. Shanann's fire softened by Chris's calm. Her confidence tempered by his quiet steadiness. And for a while, that image worked. They married in 2012. They built a home, had children, and staged their lives like a picture-perfect family portrait. Shanann's social media became the stage, post after post praising her husband, telling the world she had found her soulmate, her partner, her rock. But marriage is not measured in Facebook posts. Marriage is measured in intimacy, in daily connection, in the silent exchange of affection when no one is watching. And behind closed doors, the cracks were already forming. Chris was not a man of confrontation, and Shanann was not a woman who backed down. In the early years, that dynamic was disguised as balance. In time, it became the breeding ground for quiet resentment. The question then becomes, was Chris ever truly in love with Shanann, or was he simply performing a role he felt trapped in? To answer that, we have to follow the evidence of his behavior, his words, and his silences. And what we find is not a love story, but the slow suffocation of affection, hidden behind a mask of loyalty, until the mask finally broke. It begins not with the night of August 13, 2018, but with the illusion of love years earlier. Chris Watts and Shanann Razusek were not supposed to fit together. Not at first glance. Shanann was outspoken, charismatic, a woman who refused to let her chronic illness define her. She was open about her struggles with lupus, about the fatigue that haunted her body, about the nights of weakness when her health threatened to strip away her dreams. Yet she refused to be a victim. She fought for her independence, fought for her career, fought for a life that looked bigger and brighter than the limitations her body tried to impose. Chris, on the other hand, was quiet. Painfully quiet. He was not the man who commanded a room. He was the man who slipped into the corner, folded into silence, and seemed most comfortable blending into the background. Friends who knew him before Shanann often described him as gentle, calm, and mild. He wasn't the type to chase or to dominate. He was, instead, the type to wait, to let life happen to him, rather than carve his own path through it. When Shanann first met Chris, she admitted she wasn't looking for love. She was healing from a failed marriage, and her body was still failing her more often than not. But Chris entered her life during a season when she was fragile, and at first, he seemed like the safe, steady anchor she needed. He was patient with her health battles, supportive in ways that felt dependable, and quiet enough that Shanann's strong personality could fill the empty spaces without conflict. To outsiders, their differences made them appear perfectly matched. Her energy, his calm. Her fire, his stillness. But those closest to the couple would later look back and wonder, was this balance real, or was it a mask that hid deeper incompatibilities? Because love is not just about attraction. Love is about resilience. About facing conflict, enduring change, and adapting to pressure. And while Shanann was wired to confront, Chris was wired to retreat. In the beginning, those patterns blended into something that looked like harmony. Over time, they hardened into two irreconcilable ways of being. Their wedding in 2012 painted the picture of young hope. The smiles, the vows, the laughter all spoke to the promise of a shared future. Shanann's heart was full, she told friends and family she had found her soulmate. Chris, for his part, appeared content. But even here, in the earliest days of their marriage, shadows were present. Chris's parents, particularly his mother, had deep reservations about Shanann. They clashed with her personality, her strong will, her insistence on boundaries. That tension would linger for years, poisoning holidays and creating a wedge that only widened as time went on. Still, Chris seemed loyal. He stood beside Shanann as they built a home in North Carolina, then later moved to Colorado in search of a fresh start. They filed bankruptcy together, a decision that revealed both the weight of financial stress and the willingness to present a united front. Outwardly, they were a team. Shanann posted glowing messages about her husband online, "He's my rock. My best friend. My everything." But here lies the first crucial question in our investigation: was Chris truly her everything? Or was he simply performing the role she scripted for him? Shanann's love language was public affirmation. She filled her Facebook with videos, posts, and declarations of gratitude toward Chris. She told the world how lucky she was, how blessed she felt. To the outside observer, it looked like devotion. But marriage is not lived on Facebook. Marriage is lived in the quiet moments, the private conversations, the daily patterns that never make it online. And in those hidden spaces, Chris was beginning to reveal a truth Shanann could not yet see. His silence was not peace. It was detachment. This is where the forensic lens becomes critical. When analyzing a relationship, investigators often look for behavioral consistency. A partner who loves consistently shows love across environments. In public, in private, in stress, and in ease. But with Chris, there was a fracture. In public, he played the role of supportive husband. In private, as time went on, his distance grew. Shanann would text him about intimacy, about missing his touch, about needing reassurance. His replies were short, delayed, or evasive. Was this simply a man who struggled with communication? Or was it the early evidence of a love that never truly existed, a mask slipping at the edges? For now, the world couldn't see it. In the early years, Chris and Shanann looked like any other young couple building a life. They bought a home in Frederick, Colorado. They had 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste, who became the center of Shanann's universe. Chris appeared on camera with his daughters, quiet but attentive. Neighbors saw a picture-perfect family. But picture-perfect is not the same as genuine. And even in these years of apparent love, Shanann's friends began to notice something unsettling. Chris never seemed as expressive as his wife. He rarely initiated affection in public. He rarely lit up when she entered the room. Instead, he seemed to comply, to go along with her energy, to accept her declarations, without ever truly matching them. And that raises the first foundational truth in this forensic autopsy of their marriage: Shanann loved out loud. Chris did not. Whether out of emotional incapacity, personality, or detachment, he never mirrored the passion Shanann poured into the marriage. And while she may have believed that his silence meant stability, in reality, it meant withdrawal. The seeds of rejection were planted long before August 13th. They were planted here, in the gap between a woman who loved loudly and a man who loved quietly, if at all. Shanann loved with intensity. She was not the kind of woman to love halfway. Her friends often described her as passionate, outspoken, and deeply invested in those she cared for. If she believed in you, she fought for you. If she loved you, she made sure the world knew it. Chris, however, was different. His affection was quieter, less visible, and, as we would later learn, less enduring. To Shanann, his silence may have looked like loyalty, a comforting balance to her own fire. But psychologists warn of this trap. In relationships, what looks like calm on the surface can sometimes be emotional disengagement underneath. And once disengagement takes root, it rarely reverses itself. From the beginning, their love story was not without warning signs. Chris's parents openly disapproved of the match. His mother, Cindy, felt that Shanann was too controlling, too outspoken, too dominant for her reserved son. To Cindy, her son looked smothered, and Shanann looked overbearing. That tension would explode years later in the now infamous nut incident, when Shanann accused Cindy of endangering their daughter's life by ignoring her severe food allergies. But the roots of resentment stretched all the way back to the wedding. Even as Shanann walked down the aisle, she was marrying not just Chris, but into a family that had already drawn battle lines against her. Yet Shanann was not deterred. She believed in Chris. She often told friends that he was her safe place, the one man who had stood by her side during her most fragile years. At a time when she was battling lupus and reeling from a failed first marriage, Chris had entered her life and stayed. That loyalty mattered to her. It convinced her that, beneath his silence, there was a depth of love she could trust. But loyalty and love are not the same thing. Loyalty can be passive. Loyalty can exist without passion, without intimacy, without the kind of emotional engagement that sustains a marriage. And the more we examine Chris's behavior in these early years, the more we see a man who was present, but not necessarily connected. The financial strain was another test. In 2015, the couple filed for bankruptcy, overwhelmed by student loans, medical bills, and credit card debt. For many couples, such pressure can either unite them or drive a wedge deeper. Shanann responded with drive, throwing herself into her work, determined to build a future through her Thrive business. Chris responded with silence. While Shanann pushed forward, Chris withdrew further. In the language of psychology, this is called emotional passivity, a refusal, conscious or not, to engage with the emotional demands of a relationship. To Shanann's friends, the imbalance was obvious. She was the talker, the planner, the one pushing for solutions. Chris was the listener, the follower, the one who agreed without ever asserting his own vision. And while Shanann may have mistaken this for compatibility, the truth is more complex. A marriage where one partner drives and the other simply complies is a marriage built on fragile ground. Over time, compliance breeds resentment. And resentment, left unspoken, becomes emotional withdrawal. The children only amplified this divide. When Bella was born in 2013, followed by Celeste in 2015, Shanann's world became centered on motherhood. She documented every milestone, every smile, every family moment online. Chris played his part in the pictures, appearing as the doting father. But friends noticed that even then, his energy seemed muted. He was present, yes, but rarely expressive. Rarely the one initiating affection. This is a crucial observation. Real love is not measured by being present in a photo. It is measured by the warmth behind the eyes, the spark in the body language, the private gestures when the cameras are off. And with Chris, those sparks were missing. He looked like a man performing fatherhood, performing husbandhood, but never fully inhabiting it. Yet Shanann did not see this. Or perhaps she saw it and chose to explain it away. After all, Chris had never been a man of big words or big gestures. His love language, she may have believed, was in his presence. And for a time, that was enough for her. But underneath, something was missing. And the absence of intimacy is not a small crack, it is a fault line that, under pressure, can split an entire marriage apart. Psychologists studying long-term marriages describe a phenomenon called the silent divorce. It is when two people continue to live together, raise children, share a home, and play their roles, but emotionally, they are already separated. They stop being partners and instead become co-managers of a life. The spark of love is replaced by duty, routine, and habit. By the time Shanann was posting videos calling Chris her rock, her soulmate, her everything, it's possible Chris had already retreated into this silent divorce. He was there physically. But emotionally, he was already elsewhere. And this leads us to the central question. Was Chris ever truly in love with Shanann, or did he simply fall into the role of the dependable husband, until the role became unbearable? A marriage does not break in a single night. It fractures in silence, in avoidance, in the thousand moments where love could be spoken but is instead withheld. For Chris and Shanann Watts, the cracks began to widen in the years after their daughters were born. At first, the signs looked ordinary: the kind of strain every young couple faces. Money was tight. Their home in Frederick, Colorado was bigger than their bank account could sustain. By 2015, they filed for bankruptcy, drowning under a mountain of student loans, medical bills, and credit card debt. They were young parents with 2 small children, trying to keep up the image of success while their finances told a different story. Shanann, ever the fighter, refused to sink. She doubled down on her business with Lovell Thrive, a multi-level marketing company that promised financial freedom through supplements and lifestyle coaching. She built a personal brand online, streaming videos of her children, her marriage, her product pitches. She framed her life as inspiring, resilient, enviable. She made her home into a stage, and her marriage into a performance of loyalty and stability. But behind that image, the pressure was mounting. Thrive demanded constant work, constant recruitment, constant energy. And while Shanann had energy to give, even through illness, Chris was quieter, more withdrawn, more reluctant to step into the spotlight. When Shanann pushed, Chris retreated. When Shanann controlled, Chris complied. For years, that dynamic held. But compliance is not the same as connection. Text messages recovered later show the depth of Shanann's growing frustration. Again and again, she told Chris she felt a lack of intimacy, a lack of affection, a lack of emotional presence. "I don't feel safe with you right now," she once wrote. "I don't feel like you're giving us anything." These were not the words of a woman who felt unloved only in moments of conflict. They were the words of a wife who, in the quiet of her marriage, was suffocating from neglect. Chris's responses, when he did reply, were curt, evasive, or delayed. He gave her fragments of reassurance, but not the substance. The silence between them grew louder. Psychologists call this stonewalling, a withdrawal from emotional engagement that often predicts the collapse of a relationship. But in Chris's case, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet, subdued, almost invisible. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He simply faded. And in fading, he left Shanann fighting for 2. One friend of Shanann's later recalled. She was doing all the work in that marriage. He was just there. But presence without passion is its own form of absence. The children, Bella and Celeste, gave Shanann joy, but they also highlighted Chris's detachment. He played with them, yes. He fed them, yes. But he rarely initiated affection. Rarely showed the kind of delight most fathers radiate when they walk into a room. His love looked functional, not emotional. He performed the duties of a parent, but he seemed hollow inside them. And still, Shanann tried. She continued to praise him online. She continued to post videos of their perfect family. She continued to hope that if she spoke the words enough times, "He's my rock, my everything," eventually he might live up to them. But words cannot manufacture love where none exists. The imbalance deepened when Shanann's health and career demanded more of her. Chris was expected to support, to carry the weight of stability while she pushed forward with Thrive. Yet his personality resisted the spotlight. Where Shanann thrived on attention, Chris shrank from it. Where she projected energy, he deflated. Instead of creating balance, their differences now clashed. What once felt like compatibility now felt like opposition. In marriages like this, resentment grows in silence. Chris would not fight with Shanann, he would avoid her. He would stay quiet, stay agreeable, all while resentment pooled beneath the surface like water behind a dam. For Shanann, this silence was devastating. She needed communication. She needed intimacy. She needed reassurance. But every time she reached for him, he pulled away. This is the anatomy of detachment, one partner growing louder in need, the other quieter in retreat. One pressing forward, the other disappearing. And as the years passed, the dam did not break in words. It broke in something worse, indifference. The text records tell the story with brutal clarity. Shanann begging for connection. Chris giving nothing back. The imbalance was not hidden in secret fights or public scandals. It was hidden in plain sight, in digital conversations where only one voice was trying to keep the marriage alive. And this raises the haunting question, was Chris ever truly invested? Or was he simply a man who fell into a role he never wanted, and lacked the courage to speak the truth? Because love, even struggling love, fights. It argues. It protests. It pleads. Chris did none of those things. He simply withdrew. And that is not the behavior of a man clinging to a marriage. That is the behavior of a man waiting for it to end. A marriage doesn't collapse in a single night. It erodes slowly, in silence, in avoidance, in the 1,000 little moments where love could have been spoken but wasn't. For Chris and Shanann Watts, the fractures began after their daughters were born. Money was tight. Their home in Frederick, Colorado looked picture-perfect on the outside, but inside, finances were drowning them. By 2015, the couple filed for bankruptcy, weighed down by medical bills, loans, and credit cards. For Shanann, this was not the end but a challenge. She threw herself into her Thrive business, building a personal brand of resilience and success. She filled her social media with glowing posts, smiling videos, declarations of gratitude for her perfect husband and their family. But social media was a mask. Behind closed doors, Shanann felt alone. Her texts tell the story, "I don't feel safe with you right now. I don't feel like you're giving us anything." These weren't words born of a single fight. They were the voice of a wife who felt abandoned in her own marriage. Chris's responses were chilling in their emptiness. Short, delayed, evasive. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He simply withdrew. Psychologists call this stonewalling, a refusal to emotionally engage. But Chris's silence was more than that. It was indifference. The imbalance was brutal. Shanann begged for connection. Chris gave nothing back. She reached for him in love, and he met her with absence. Even as a father, his love looked functional, not passionate. He played with Bella and Celeste, but rarely lit up with the joy most fathers radiate. He looked like a man performing parenthood, not inhabiting it. Shanann noticed. She told friends she felt like she was married to a stranger. This is the anatomy of detachment. One partner grows louder in need, the other quieter in retreat. Shanann poured herself into holding the marriage together. Chris faded further away. By 2018, Shanann was exhausted. She confronted him about intimacy, about the coldness between them. She begged him to talk. Still, he said almost nothing. And here lies the forensic truth: real love, even failing love, fights. It argues, it pleads, it resists. Chris did none of that. His silence wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a man already gone. The cracks had become canyons. And into that canyon, Chris was about to invite someone else. He didn't fall in love with another woman. He built an exit. For years, Chris presented as agreeable, dependable, easy to live with. Then, almost overnight, he began to edit himself. The changes looked small in isolation, new playlists, fresh shirts, careful hair, time at the gym that stretched an extra 30 minutes, then an hour. He watched his calories. He photographed his progress. He looked in mirrors he used to ignore. These are classic markers of a man rehearsing a new version of himself. Not for his wife. For an audience she could not see. At work, a coworker became the mirror for that new persona. Nicole did not know their marriage the way Shanann did. She knew the edited cut, the quiet man who listened, who laughed softly, who said little about home. With her, he didn't carry the weight of bankruptcy, food allergies, strict routines, or years of unresolved tension. With her, he did not feel small. He felt unfinished, which is intoxicating. The affair wasn't only about sex, it was about self-invention. Beside a new witness, he could claim a self he never managed to be at home. Watch what happens next. The same man who left Shanann's messages unanswered began writing incomplete sentences. He offered praise, talked about feelings, future plans, vacations, clean slates. The man who had no words for his wife had endless words for his fantasy. That contrast is the evidence. It tells you where his emotional life lived, and where it did not. He curated a story for each woman. For Shanann, the drained husband, too tired to talk. For the other, the awakened man, finally alive. He began spending in ways that served the new identity, small purchases first, then bolder choices. Secret receipts, erased histories, selective honesty. In the psychology of double lives, there is always a ledger. The old self is starved so the new one can be fed. He learned to be unavailable at strategic times. Phone face down. Work explanations that sounded responsible. A shower immediately after coming home, a habit that can be practical, or purposeful. The family calendar was no longer a map of his life, it was a schedule to work around while he built a parallel one. Shanann's texts kept arriving, softer at first, then sharper, then pleading. He replied with weather talk, logistics, and the kind of one-word acknowledgments that say less than silence. To an investigator, that discrepancy is the case. When the same person can be emotionally fluent in one channel and mute in another, you are not looking at a communication problem. You are looking at a choice. In private, he framed the marriage as history and the affair as possibility. Fantasy runs on the promise of future tense, we will, we could, we deserve, we'll start over. Reality runs on present tense, we need, we owe, we have to. With Nicole, he could live in tomorrow. With Shanann, he had to live in today. Tomorrow won. His body told the story, too. Weight dropped. Confidence rose. He learned to stand differently, shoulders back, jaw set, a quiet swagger that photographs notice before spouses do. He started to smile with his teeth in pictures of himself, and with a closed mouth in pictures with his family. Small things, yes. But in behavioral analysis, small things are rarely small when they all point the same way. Then came the language shift. With Shanann, he used explanations, I'm tired. I'm stressed. I'm thinking. With the other, he used declarations, I feel. I want. I've never. Declarations are ownership. Explanations are evasions. He owned the fantasy. He evaded the marriage. He also tested boundaries, not with arguments, but with absences. Longer workouts. Late returns. Unreachable pockets of time. He watched how quickly suspicion flared and how quickly it died. Each time nothing exploded, the risk tolerance increased. In double lives, this is called creep, drifting further from the original self in increments, trusting that familiarity will keep anyone from measuring the distance. Shanann sensed it. She asked direct questions. She tried to restart intimacy without shaming him. She offered plans, counseling, trips, resets. He floated, calm on the surface, empty underneath. The more she reached, the more he stiffened. To outsiders, he looked composed. To a profiler, he looked gone. In his head, he began converting the past into a justification catalog. Every controlling moment became evidence. Every disagreement became proof. This revisionist accounting is not unique to this case, it is a standard feature of betrayal. To step into a new identity, he had to reframe the old one as unlivable. Not difficult. Unlivable. That word matters, because it moralizes the exit. He also ritualized the new relationship. Specific songs. Specific restaurants. A shared phrase. People underestimate how powerful these rituals are. They are anchors, reminders that the new life is real even when the old life refuses to die. Each ritual made home feel more like an obstacle than an origin. The financial contradictions deepened. He spoke thrift at home and spent freely elsewhere. He framed discipline as virtue in one space and indulgence as freedom in the other. When money begins to tell two different stories, the person telling them is living two different lives. Then came the planning behaviors. Not grand schemes, ordinary logistics recast as liberation, where to live, what to sell, how to explain. The self he performed with Shanann was now a liability to the self he performed with Nickel. In that collision, empathy usually breaks first. It did here. If you trace the timeline, you will see the decisive curve. As the affair intensified, his capacity to show basic tenderness at home collapsed. He was not pulled between two loves. He had already cut the rope to one and was clinging to the other with both hands. This is why he didn't argue. Arguments would imply an intention to fix. He wasn't fixing. He was phasing out. He didn't choose transparency. He chose momentum. And momentum is dangerous because it feels like inevitability while it is really just recurring cowardice dressed as fate. The more future he promised in one place, the more present he retracted in the other. He began to speak of being happy for once, a phrase that always sounds noble until you count the bodies it steps over. Understand this, he did not become a different man. He revealed the man he would allow himself to be when freed from the expectations that had once sheltered him. The double life was not an aberration, it was the unmasked preference. And preference, when protected long enough by secrecy, hardens into entitlement. By the end of this act, the picture is plain. A husband who would not answer his wife's pleas found his voice with someone new. A father who performed duty without warmth discovered warmth when duty was removed. A man who claimed exhaustion at home found energy somewhere else every day. Love is where your effort goes. His effort went elsewhere. Part 2 showed the erosion. Part 3 shows the replacement. The marriage was no longer starving by neglect, it was being cannibalized to feed a fantasy. And when a fantasy demands more than secrecy can supply, the person keeping it alive starts asking himself the most dangerous question in the world. What would it take to make this life permanent? Love rarely dies with a scream. More often, it dies with silence. And in the Watts home, silence had already become a third presence in the marriage, louder than either Chris or Shanann. By the summer of 2018, Shanann felt it pressing in on her from every side. She was pregnant with their third child, a boy she hoped would bring new life into their home. She named him before he was born, Nico. Naming him was an act of faith. She believed, or wanted to believe, that the arrival of another child could heal what was broken. But Chris was already gone. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally, he was no longer hers. Shanann's texts in those last weeks are not the words of a woman ready to give up. They are the words of a woman who still believed love could be salvaged. I don't feel safe with you right now. I keep trying to talk to you, but you shut me out. I miss the way you used to hold me. She reached for him in every way she knew how, softly, then firmly, then desperately. She planned trips for them to reconnect. She suggested counseling. She pleaded for intimacy, not in anger, but in sorrow. She asked him to fight for their marriage, to choose her, to choose their family. Chris gave nothing back. His responses were short, flat, emotionless. I'm tired. I don't know. We'll see. The man who wrote love notes to another woman gave his wife only fragments. The passion, the warmth, the energy, all of it had been redirected. What Shanann begged for at home, Nico received in abundance. And that's the cruelest evidence of all. This wasn't a man incapable of love, of affection, of intimacy. This was a man choosing where to place it. Choosing not to give it to his wife. Those around Shanann began to notice the change. Friends said she looked tired, worn, carrying the weight of holding her marriage together alone. She confided that Chris no longer touched her, no longer kissed her, no longer even looked at her the way he once had. She told one friend she felt like she was married to a stranger. Chris, meanwhile, was transforming his body, his habits, his life. But not for her. He worked out harder. He monitored his diet. He shaved years of passivity off his frame, sculpting himself into a man who looked ready for a new life. He didn't do it for Shanann. He did it for the woman waiting on the other side of his lies. This is the psychology of replacement. When someone invests their energy in one relationship while starving another, the death of the second isn't an accident, it's a decision. Chris was not losing love for Shanann. He was killing it. By late July, Shanann flew to North Carolina with the girls for the summer. She thought distance might give Chris space to reset. Instead, it gave him freedom to deepen his affair. While she sent photos of their daughters, he sent love notes to his mistress. While she asked if he missed her, he searched online for vacation getaways for two. The emotional split was complete. Shanann was still living in their marriage. Chris was already rehearsing his next life. When she returned to Colorado in early August, the gap between them was no longer deniable. Shanann noticed the way he recoiled from her touch. The way he avoided her eyes. The way his phone never left his hand. Her messages grew sharper, tinged with suspicion and fear. She asked if he was seeing someone else. He denied it, but his body language, his absence, his indifference betrayed him.
I will continue fighting for my children, for my husband, for myself.
And then came the confrontation. One night, as Shanann pressed again for honesty, Chris said the words that ended her marriage before he ever ended her life. I don't love you anymore. 7 words. Cold. Final. Delivered not in anger, but in detachment. For Shanann, it was a knife through everything she had fought to preserve. For Chris, it was liberation. He had finally spoken aloud what his silences had been saying for months, perhaps years. Investigators later called it the moment Shanann's heart broke before her body ever did. Because what she had feared, what she had tried to deny, what she had begged against, it was true. The man she loved, the father of her children, the partner she had built a life with, he no longer loved her. Perhaps he never truly had. And here lies the devastating conclusion of this act. Love fights to survive. Even broken love argues, pleads, protests. Chris did none of that. He didn't fight for his marriage, because he had already chosen another life. His silence, his coldness, his withdrawal, they weren't symptoms of exhaustion. They were strategies of exit. By the time he spoke those final words, Shanann was still reaching for him. He was already erasing her. The death of their love happened not in a moment of rage, but in a long, calculated season of neglect. When he told her, "I don't love you anymore," he was not confessing a new truth. He was confirming a decision made long before. And with that, the stage was set for what came next. Not just the end of a marriage, but the annihilation of a family. Love leaves evidence. And when investigators sifted through the ashes of Chris and Shanann's marriage, what they found was not proof of devotion, but a chilling absence of it. After the murders, when Chris sat in interrogation rooms, in courtrooms, and later in prison, he did not speak of Shanann with grief. He spoke of her as a problem. A control freak. A woman too demanding, too strict, too consuming. Even behind bars, he rewrote her into the villain of his story, as though diminishing her memory could justify the horror of what he had done. He told investigators he never loved her anymore. He admitted that during their final confrontation, those words, "I don't love you anymore," were the only truth he offered her. Everything else was lies. But even here, the question lingers, did Chris whatsoever truly love his wife at all? From his cell, Chris wrote to pen pals, letters that would later be published. He described Shanann as controlling, suffocating. He painted himself as the victim of a marriage that trapped him. And yet, in the same ink, he referred to Nicole as, "the one who made me feel alive." This is the psychology of betrayal in its rawest form. The person who once shared your life is rewritten as the cage. The person who tempts you away is recast as salvation. It was not love for Shanann that Chris carried into prison. It was resentment. And resentment is not the residue of love. It is the opposite of it. For Shanann's loved ones, the question of whether Chris ever loved her has no comforting answer. Friends recall the videos, the Facebook posts, the laughter of family vacations. They remember how Shanann praised him, how she believed in him. They ask themselves, how could that devotion have been so one-sided? Perhaps, they conclude, Chris loved the idea of Shanann, the strong woman who fought for him when he was invisible, the determined wife who built him a family. But ideas are fragile. And when reality no longer matched the fantasy, he withdrew. From a psychological perspective, the evidence points not to enduring love, but to compliance. Chris played the role of husband because it was expected. He played the role of father because it was routine. But real love is tested under pressure, and when tested, Chris did not bend. He broke. When Shanann begged for intimacy, he withdrew. When she asked for counseling, he refused. When she carried his child, he planned a future with another woman. When confronted with her pain, he told her coldly, "I don't love you anymore." Love argues. Love resists. Love, even in failure, leaves behind traces of fight. But Chris left behind only silence, detachment, and indifference. The conclusion, then, is brutal in its simplicity. Chris Watts may have once worn the mask of love, but the evidence shows he never sustained it. His devotion was not to his wife, but to the image of a family that served him, until it no longer did. And that brings us here, to the question that began this story. Did Chris Watts ever love Shanann? The answer is written not in his words, but in his actions. Love is measured by effort, by sacrifice, by the willingness to stay present even when it is hard. Chris did none of those things. His effort went elsewhere. His passion went elsewhere. His heart, such as it was, lived in a fantasy that erased his own family. So, no. The evidence tells us that he did not love her, not in the way she deserved, not in the way she believed, and perhaps not at all. And that is what makes this story so devastating. Shanann believed in love. She believed in Chris. She gave her energy, her devotion, her very life to the man who would ultimately end it. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: real love leaves evidence. Silence is not peace. Absence is not patience. And when someone stops fighting for you, they have already left, even if they are still standing in your home. Don't ignore the silences. Don't explain away the distance. Don't mistake compliance for love. Because love fights. Love speaks. Love endures. And what Chris gave was none of these.